we offer you deep historical information from history on YouTube channel. Subscribe. Now don't forget to turn on notifications. Aztecs. The Aztecs were a Mesoamerican culture that flourished in central Mexico in the post-classical period from 1300 to 1521. The Aztec people included the various ethnic groups of central Mexico, especially those who spoke the Nahuatl language, which dominated much of Central America from the 14th to the 16th centuries. From the 14th to the 16th centuries, Aztec culture was organized into city-states, altepetl, some of which joined together to form alliances, political confederations, or empires. The Aztec Empire was a confederation of 3 city-states founded in 1427, Tenochtitlan, the city-state of Mexica, or Tenochca, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, formerly part of the Tepanec Empire, whose dominant power was Azcapotzalco. While the term Aztec is usually restricted to Tenochtitlan's Mexica, it is also commonly used to refer to the Nahuapolites, or peoples of central Mexico during the Spanish colonial period, 1521–1821, as well as the pre-Hispanic period, 1200–1300. Early development and migration. Preface. Mexico. Most of the ethnic groups of central Mexico in the post-classic period shared the basic cultural characteristics of Mesoamerica, and many of the features that characterize Aztec culture cannot be said to be unique to the Aztecs. For the same reason, the concept of Aztec civilization is best understood as a specific horizon of a general Mesoamerican civilization. Central Mexican culture includes the cultivation of maize, the social division between nobles, pipiltin, and commoners, macahualtin, a pantheon including Tezcatlipoca, Tlaloc, and Quetzalcoatl, and a calendar system of 365 days of Xiuhpohualli, interspersed with a Tonalpohualli of 260 days, the guardian god Huit, and a Xiuhpohualli of 365 days. The 260 days, the guardian god Huitzilopochtli, the twin pyramids, and the ceramics, known from Aztec E to IV, were unique to Tenochtitlan, Mexico. The Mexica were late arrivals in the Valley of Mexico and founded the city-state of Tenochtitlan on unpromising islands in Lake Texcoco, which later became the dominant power of the Aztec Triple Alliance or Aztec Empire, an empire that extended its political hegemony far beyond the Valley of Mexico, conquering other city-states in Mesoamerica in the late post-classic period. Aztec culture and history is known primarily from archaeological evidence found in excavations such as that of the famous Templo Mayor in Mexico City, from indigenous writings, from eyewitness accounts by Spanish conquistadors such as Cortés and Bernal Díaz del Castillo, and especially from 16th and 17th century accounts of Aztec culture and history written in Spanish or Nahuatl by Spanish clergy and literate Aztecs, such as the famous illustrated bilingual Spanish and Nahuatl 12-volume Florentine Codex. Important for knowledge of the post-conquest Nahuas was the training of indigenous scribes to write alphabetic texts in Nahuatl, especially for local use under Spanish colonial rule. At its height, Aztec culture had rich and complex philosophical, mythological, and religious traditions, as well as remarkable architectural and artistic achievements. The arrival of the Aztecs. Chapultepec. Numerous city-states existed in the Valley of Mexico, c. 1250 AD, including Chalco, Xochimilco, Tlacopan, Culhuacan, and Azcapotzalco, the most powerful being Culhuacan on the southern shore of Lake Texcoco and Azcapotzalco on the western shore. Consequently, when the Mexicans arrived in the Valley of Mexico as a semi-nomadic tribe, they found much of the area already occupied. Around 1248, they first settled at Chapultepec, a hill with numerous springs on the western shore of Lake Texcoco. Settlement. Tizapan. In time, the Tepanecs of Azcapotzalco drove the Mexicans from Chapultepec, and in 1299, the barbarian ruler Cocoxtli granted the Mexicans permission to settle on the empty prairies of Tizapan. There they intermarried and assimilated into the Culhuacan culture. 1300. 1428. Consolidation and expansion. Expansion. Culhuacan. In 1323, they asked Achicometl, the new ruler of Culhuacan, to make his daughter the goddess Yaoquihuatl. Unbeknownst to the king, the Mexican had actually planned to sacrifice her, believing that by doing so, the princess would join the gods as a deity. The story goes that during a feast, a priest came out and was being skinned as part of the ritual. When the king and the people of Culhuacan saw this, they were horrified and expelled the Mexicans. The founding of the Aztecs Tenochtitlan. Forced to flee, in 1325 they traveled to a small island on the west side of Lake Texcoco, where they began to build their own city of Tenochtitlan, eventually creating a large artificial island. The Aztec god Huitzilopochtli is said to have instructed the Aztecs to found their city, where they saw an eagle on a cactus with a snake in its claws, found on the current Mexican flag. Apparently, the Aztecs had this vision on the small island where Tenochtitlan was founded. First King Acamapichtli, Tenochtitlan. In 1376, Mexico elected its first Tlatoani, which can be translated into English as king, Acamapichtli, following traditions learned from Culhuacan, which required daily and uninterrupted cleansing as a ritual. Huitzilihuitl Tenochtitlan. A good politician, Huitzilihuitl, continued his father's policies by seeking alliances with his neighbors. He created the Royal Council, or Tlatocan, and appointed 4 permanent electors to advise the new king because of his inexperience at the beginning of each reign. Huitzilihuitl, as depicted in the Codex Tovar, married Ayaochihuatl, daughter of Tezozomoc, the powerful Tlatoani of Azcapotzalco, and was reduced to a symbolic level of tribute. After the death of Ayaochihuatl, Huitzilihuitl married Miahuaxihuitl for the second time. She gave birth to Moctezuma Thermers, who became the 5th Huaytlatoani of the Aztecs, and during his reign the weaving industry grew. He supplied cotton cloth not only to Tenochtitlan, but also to Azcapotzalco and Cuauhnahuac. Mexicans no longer had to wear coarse ayates made from maguey fibers, but could switch to soft, dyed cotton. Chimalpopoca, Tenochtitlan. On the day of Chimalpopoca's coronation in 1417, some sources say 1416 or 1418, his brother Tlacaelel I was elected high priest. When he ascended the throne at the age of 20, Tenochtitlan was a branch of the Tepanec city of Azcapotzalco, ruled by his grandfather Tezozomoc. This alliance and his position within the Mexica was strengthened by Tenochtitlan's loyalty during Tezozomoc's war with Ixtlilxochitl I of Texcoco in 1418. Chimalpopoca also had a causeway built to Tlacopan, with spans crossed by wooden bridges that were removed at night. He also dedicated a sacrificial stone in the Tlacocomaco section of Tenochtitlan during his reign, and the conquest of Tequisquiac is attributed to him. The Battle of Tepanec, Valley of Mexico. Tezozomoc's death in 1426 brought his sons Tayatzin and Maxtla to the throne, with Maxtla most likely poisoning Tayatzin. In 1428, Maxtla was overthrown by the newly formed Aztec Triple Alliance, which included the Mexicas of Tenochtitlan and Acolhua of Texcoco, as well as Maxtla's fellow Tepanecs of Tlacopan. With the rise of the Aztec Empire, Tlacopan became the dominant Tepanec city, although both Tenochtitlan and Texcoco eclipsed Tlacopan in size and prestige. Texcoco Tenochtitlan Itzcoatl was the natural son of Tlatoani Acamapichtli and an unknown Tepanec woman from Azcapotzalco. He was chosen as king when his predecessor, nephew Chimalpopoca, was killed by Maxtla of the nearby Tepanec Altepetel, city-state of Azcapotzalco. Itzcoatl, allied with Nezahualcoyotl of Texcoco, went on to defeat Maxtla and end Tepanec rule in central Mexico. After this victory, Itzcoatl, Nezahualcoyotl, and the Tlacopan king Totoquilhuastli formed the alliance known as the Aztec Triple Alliance, which formed the basis of the later Aztec Empire. 1428, 1519, Triple Alliance and the Golden Age, Aztec Empire Tenochtitlan. The Triple Alliance was formed by the victors of a civil war between the city of Azcapotzalco and its former dependent provinces. Although the empire was originally conceived as an alliance of three self-governing city-states, Tenochtitlan quickly became militarily dominant. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, the alliance territory was de facto ruled by Tenochtitlan, with the other alliance partners playing a secondary role. Mexico, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. These three city-states ruled the Valley of Mexico and the surrounding region from 1428. Expansion Tepoztlan. The first Tlatoani of the Triple Alliance was Itzcoatl, and together with his Texcocan co-ruler Nezahualcoyotl, he began to expand the territory dominated by the alliance southwards, conquering Nahua-speaking cities such as Cuauhnahuac, now Cuernavaca, and Huexotla, towards Coatlinchan and Tepoztlan, in the modern state of Morelos, then dominated by Tlahuica. During this period, the Nahuan cities on the immediate shores of the lake, such as Xochimilco, Culhuacan, and Mixquic, were also brought under control. Battle of Azcapotzalco. Azcapotzalco. During a disputed Tepanec succession, Maxtla killed his brother and seized the throne, then laid siege to Tenochtitlan. An alliance of rivals under Nezahualcoyotl drove Maxtla back to the siege of Azcapotzalco, which fell 114 days later, and the tyrant was executed. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tacuba later formed the Triple Alliance, which became the basis of the mighty Aztec Empire. Moctezuma, Ben, and Tlacaelel. Chalco. Two of the main architects of the Aztec Empire were the half-brothers Tlacaelel and Moctezuma the Friar. He needed to reconquer cities that had first been conquered by Itzcoatl, but had since rebelled. He asked a number of smaller cities to contribute to the construction of a new great temple, and only Chalco refused, prompting Moctezuma to launch a war against them that lasted several years, then conquered the Huastec region under the pretext of securing Aztec traders in the area, and then went to war against the Mixtecs of Coixtlahuaca. Later, Moctezuma marched on the Totonacan cities of Veracruz and conquered Xalapa, Cosamaloapan, Cotaxtla, modern Cuetlaxtlan, Ahuilaizapan, modern Orizaba, and moved north into Huastec territory, conquering Tuxpan and Zilotepec. Tlacaelel reformulated or reinforced the Aztec concept of a chosen people and elevated the tribal god hero Huitzilopochtli to the top of the pantheon. At the same time, Tlacaelel increased the level and frequency of human sacrifice, especially during the period of natural disasters beginning in 1446, according to Duran. At the beginning of Tlacaelel's reign, Mexico was a vassal. Eventually, they became Aztecs, rulers of a socially stratified and expansionist empire. Floods of Tenochtitlan. In 1452, the great Aztec city of Tenochtitlan was hit by a flood that destroyed the city and caused widespread famine and starvation. It is estimated that more than 10,000 people were sacrificed to the gods during this time to stop the famine. Much time and resources were spent rebuilding the great city and building a temple in its honor, so that the gods could regain their favor. Nezahualcoyotl Dike Tenochtitlan. During the reign of Moctezuma, the Nezahualcoyotl Dike, said to have been designed by Nezahualcoyotl, was built, estimated to be 12 to 16 kilometer, 7.5 to 9.9 mic long. It was completed around 1453. The dike kept fresh water from springs in the waters around Tenochtitlan and brackish water behind the dike to the east. Ahayacatl Tenochtitlan. In his youth, his military prowess won him the favor of influential figures such as Nezahualcoyotl and Tlacaelel Burr, and on the death of Moctezuma the Wern in 1469, he was chosen to succeed to the throne despite the displeasure of his two older brothers, Tizoc and Ahuitzotl. It is also significant that the Great Sunstone, also known as the Aztec calendar, was carved under his leadership. In 1475, Axayacatl, using the humiliating behavior of some Tlatelolcan citizens as an excuse, invaded his neighbor, killed its ruler Moquihuix, and appointed a military governor in his place. Axayacatl devoted much of his 12-year reign to consolidating his militaristic reputation. In 1473, he invaded the neighboring Altepetl of Tlatelolco, see Michoacán, 1476. Battle of Tlatelolco. Tlatelolco. The Battle of Tlatelolco was fought between two pre-Hispanic Altepetl, or city-states, Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco, two independent polities inhabiting the island of Lake Texcoco in the basin of Mexico, between Moquihuix or Moquihuixtli, the Tlatoani, ruler of Tlatelolco, and Axayacatl, the Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan. This was a last-ditch attempt by Moquihuix and his allies to challenge the power of Tenochca, who had recently consolidated their political dominance within the empire. Ultimately, the rebellion failed, resulting in the death of Moquihuix, who fell from the great temple of Tlatelolco in the Codex Mendoza. As a result of the war, Tlatelolco was captured by Tenochtitlan, stripped of its privileges, and forced to pay tribute to Tenochtitlan every 80 days. Tizoc, Tenochtitlan. Most sources agree that Tizoc succeeded his older brother in 1481, Aztec, year 2 Ev. Although Tizoc's reign was relatively short, he began the reconstruction of the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan. This task was completed by his younger brother in 1487, and also suppressed the rebellion of the Matlatzincan peoples in the Toluca Valley. According to the Codex Mendoza, during Tizoc's reign, the Altepeme of Tonalimoquetzayan, Toxico, Ecatepec, Quilan, Tecaxic, Tolocan, Yanquitlan, Tlapan, Atezcahuacan, Mazatlan, Xochietla, Tamapachco, Ecatliquapechco, and Miquetlan were conquered. After this defeat, Tizoc had to fight mainly to maintain control of the territories he had already conquered. And when he failed to take control of new cities, he was replaced, probably by poison, by his younger brother Ahuitzotl. Ahuitzotl Tenochtitlan. Perhaps the greatest known military leader of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, Ahuitzotl began his reign by putting down a Huastec rebellion, and then quickly more than doubled the territory under Aztec rule, conquering the Mixtec, Zapotec, and other peoples from the Pacific coast of Mexico to western Guatemala. Ahuitzotl also oversaw a major reconstruction of Tenochtitlan on a larger scale, including the extension of the Great Pyramid, or Templo Mayor, in the 8th century BC. The Great Temple Tenochtitlan. The temple was called Huey Teocalli in Nahuatl. It was dedicated to both Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and agriculture, and each had a shrine at the top of the pyramid with a separate staircase. The tower in the center of the adjacent picture was dedicated to Quetzalcoatl as Ehecatl, the god of the wind. The Great Temple, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc and measuring approximately 100 x 80 meters, 328 x 262 ft, at its base, dominated the sacred precinct. Construction of the first temple began after 1325 and was rebuilt 6 times. Christopher Columbus landed in Santo Domingo. Christopher Columbus reached the island of Hispaniola on his first voyage in December 1492. On Columbus' second voyage in 1493, the colony of La Isabela was established on the northeast coast. Isabela almost failed due to famine and disease. In 1496, Santo Domingo was built and became the new capital. The first cathedral in the New World was built here, and for several decades, Santo Domingo was also the administrative center of the expanding empire. Men such as Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro lived and worked in Santo Domingo before embarking on their successful voyages of discovery. Moctezuma II, Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma was the 9th Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan and the 6th Huey Tlatoani, or Emperor of the Aztec Empire, ruling from 1502 or 1503 to 1520. After his coronation, he established 38 more provincial divisions, largely to centralize the empire. He sent bureaucrats with military garrisons to ensure that taxes were paid, national laws were upheld, and to act as local judges in the event of disputes. 17. In 1519-1521, Moctezuma received the first reports of Europeans setting foot on the east coast of his empire. This was the expedition of Juan de Grijalva, who landed at San Juan de Ulua, which, although in Totonac territory, was under the patronage of the Aztec Empire. Veracruz, accompanied by about 11 ships, 500 men, 13 horses, and a small number of cannons, Cortés landed on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mayan territory. Tlaxcalan alliance. Tlaxcala conquistador Hernán Cortés and his Spanish troops did not conquer the Aztec Empire alone. They had allies, among the most important of which were the Tlaxcalans. As the conquistador Hernán Cortés moved inland from the coast to boldly conquer the Mexican Aztec Empire, he had to pass through the territory of the fiercely independent Tlaxcalans, who were bitter enemies of Mexico. At first, the Tlaxcalans fought the conquistadors mercilessly, but after repeated defeats they decided to make peace with the Spaniards and ally with them against their traditional enemies. The support of the Tlaxcalans would prove crucial to Cortés's campaign. Cholula Massacre. Cholula. In October 1519, Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés gathered the nobles of the Aztec city of Cholula in one of the city's courtyards, where Cortés accused them of treason. Within hours, thousands of Cholula's inhabitants, including many of the local nobility, lay dead in the streets. The Cholula massacre sent a powerful message to the rest of Mexico, especially to the mighty Aztec state and its mercurial leader, Montezuma II. Cortés enters Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan. Cortés' army entered the city through the flower-covered gate of Iztapalapa, associated with the god Quetzalcoatl. Cortés was greeted warmly by Moctezuma, the captive woman Malinali Tenepal, also known as Doña Marina, translated from Nahuatl into Chontal Maya. Jerónimo de Aguilar, a Spaniard, translated from Chontal Maya into Spanish. Moctezuma gave the Spaniards lavish gifts of gold, which, instead of appeasing them, stimulated their ambitions to plunder. Cortés claimed in letters to King Charles that it was at this point that he learned that the Aztecs regarded him as either an emissary of the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl or Quetzalcoatl himself, a belief disputed by several modern historians. The capture of Montezuma, Tenochtitlan. The wealth of Tenochtitlan was astounding, and Cortés and his lieutenants began planning how to take the city. A major part of their plan was to capture Montezuma and hold him until more reinforcements arrived to protect the city. A Spanish garrison left on the coast was attacked by some representatives of Mexico, and many were killed. Cortés arranged an interview with Montezuma, accused him of planning the attack, and took him into custody. Surprisingly, Montezuma agreed, provided he could tell the story that he had voluntarily escorted the Spaniards to the palace where they were staying. The massacre at the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan. The Great Temple Massacre, also known as the Alvarado Massacre, was an event that took place on 22nd of May 1520 during the Spanish conquest of Mexico in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, where the celebration of the Feast of Toxcatl ended with the massacre of the Aztec elite. While Hernán Cortés was in Tenochtitlan, he heard of other Spaniards coming ashore, and Cortés had to leave the city to fight them. In his absence, Moctezuma asked the vice-governor, Pedro de Alvarado, for permission to celebrate Toxcatl, an Aztec festival in honor of Tezcatlipoca, one of their main gods. But once the festivities had begun, Alvarado interrupted them by killing all the warriors and nobles celebrating in the Great Temple. The few who escaped the massacre by climbing over the walls told the community of the Spanish atrocities. Death of Moctezuma. Tenochtitlan. Cortés returned to a besieged palace, unable to restore order, and with the Spaniards starving as the market was closed, Cortés took a reluctant Montezuma to the roof of the palace where he begged his people to stop attacking the Spaniards. Enraged, the people of Tenochtitlan threw stones and spears at the badly wounded Montezuma before the Spaniards could take him back to the palace. According to Spanish accounts, Montezuma died of his wounds 2 or 3 days later, on 29th June. Sad Night. Tenochtitlan, La Noche Triste, the Sorrowful Night, was a major event during the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire when Hernán Cortés, His army of Spanish conquistadors and their indigenous allies sacked the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Francisco López de Gomara, who was not an eyewitness, estimated that 450 Spaniards and 4,000 allies died. The Battle of Otumba. Otumba. The Spanish invaders who had managed to escape from Tenochtitlan were weak, demoralized and wounded, and the new emperor of Mexico, Cuitláhuac, decided that he must try to crush them once and for all. He sent a large army of every warrior he could find under the command of the new Cihuacoatl, a kind of captain general, whose brother was Matlatzin-Catzin. On or about July 1520, the two armies met on the plains of the Otumba Valley. Seeing the brightly dressed Matlatzin-Catzin and his generals at the other end of the battlefield, Cortés decided to make a risky move. Summoning his best remaining horsemen, Cristobal de Olid, Pablo de Sandoval, Pedro de Alvarado, Alonso de Avila, and Juan de Salamanca, Cortés advanced on the enemy captains. The Mexican captain lost his footing and Salamanca killed him with his spear, capturing the enemy standard in the process. The Aztec army was demoralized and disbanded without its standard, used to direct troop movements. Smallpox Tenochtitlan. The appearance of smallpox among the Aztecs has been attributed to an African slave named Francisco Eguia, according to one account, but this is disputed. From May to September, smallpox gradually spread to Tepeaca and Tlaxcala, and in the autumn of 1520 to Tenochtitlan. Cortés names only one indigenous leader who died of smallpox, Maxi-Catzin, but Cuitláhuac and other indigenous chiefs also died of smallpox, and Chimalpan reports that some chiefs in Chalco also died of the disease. These deaths were part of a widespread epidemic that decimated the general population. Estimates of deaths range from a quarter to half of the population of central Mexico. The fall of Tenochtitlan. The fall of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, was a decisive event in the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. It occurred in 1521, after extensive manipulation of local factions and exploitation of pre-existing divisions by the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés, aided by his indigenous allies and supported by his interpreter and friend, La Malinche. Although many battles had been fought between the Aztec Empire under Cuauhtémoc and the Spanish-led coalition, which was itself composed mainly of indigenous, mostly Tlaxcaltec personnel, the most important of these was the Siege of Tenochtitlan, the outcome of which was probably largely determined by the effects of a smallpox epidemic, which devastated the Aztec population and dealt a severe blow to the Aztec leadership while leaving an immune Spanish leadership intact, led directly to the collapse of Aztec civilization and marked the end of the first phase of the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. 1519, 1521, Spanish conquest and the collapse of the emperors. Cortés lands in Mexico epilogue. Mexico today, the legacy of the Aztecs lives on in Mexico in many forms. Archaeological sites are excavated and opened to the public, and artifacts are prominently displayed in museums. Place names and quotations from the Aztec language Nahuatl have permeated the Mexican landscape and vocabulary, and Aztec symbols and mythology have been promoted by the Mexican government and incorporated into contemporary Mexican nationalism as emblems of the country. In 17th and 18th century Europe, the Aztecs were often described as barbaric, monstrous, and culturally inferior. Even before Mexico's independence, American-born Spaniards, Criollos, used Aztec history to justify their own search for symbols of local pride, separate from those of Spain. We offer you deep historical information from history on YouTube channel. Subscribe. Now don't forget to turn on notifications.